There is something profoundly confusing and deeply painful about watching the avoidant person who couldn't sustain emotional intimacy with you, who withdrew every time genuine closeness developed, who made you feel like asking for basic emotional availability was demanding too much, who treated commitment like a cage and vulnerability like a threat. Watching this same person engage in casual, physical intimacy with others, with an ease that makes absolutely no sense given how terrified they seemed of intimacy with you. You gave them everything: patience, understanding, genuine love, emotional safety, the kind of connection most people spend their entire lives searching for. And they ran from it, created distance from it, treated it like it was suffocating them. But physical intimacy with people they barely know, with people they have no emotional investment in, with people who represent no threat of actual relationship, this they can do effortlessly, freely, without any of the panic or withdrawal or defensive behavior that characterized their interactions with you when you wanted something deeper than surface-level connection. And this creates specific kind of pain that's difficult to articulate because it feels like proof that the problem was you. If they can be intimate with others but couldn't sustain intimacy with you, doesn't that mean you were too much, too intense, too demanding, exactly what their behavior seemed to communicate? But here is the truth that their patterns actually reveal. The truth that understanding their psychology makes devastatingly clear. The avoidant will sleep with anybody, precisely because sleeping with just anybody requires nothing from them emotionally, demands no vulnerability, creates no genuine intimacy, poses no threat to their defended sense of self. Physical intimacy without emotional connection isn't intimacy to the avoidant. It's a release valve, a way to meet physical needs without risking emotional exposure, a carefully controlled interaction that can be walked away from without consequence because nothing real was ever at stake. The ease with which they engage in casual physical encounters isn't evidence they're comfortable with intimacy. It's evidence of how desperately uncomfortable they are with actual intimacy, how completely they've separated physical connection from emotional connection as a defense mechanism that allows them to meet certain needs while protecting themselves from the vulnerability that genuine closeness would require. You weren't too much. You were simply offering something real, something that required their actual presence, their actual vulnerability, their actual emotional availability. And real intimacy is the one thing the avoidance defensive system is specifically designed to prevent. Casual physical encounters with people who don't matter emotionally, that's safe, that's manageable, that's completely unthreatening to the defensive structure they've built their entire identity around. You were a threat, not because you did anything wrong, but because you offered something genuine. And genuine connection is terrifying to someone whose entire psychological architecture is built on the premise that genuine connection leads to pain, that vulnerability creates opportunities for abandonment, that letting someone matter means giving them the power to destroy you. The avoidant will sleep with anybody because anybody doesn't threaten anything that matters. You threatened everything that matters, and their system protected them from you the only way it knows how, through withdrawal, through creating distance, through making the genuine intimacy you offered feel so uncomfortable that they had to escape from it. Understanding why they can engage in casual physical intimacy while running from emotional intimacy reveals something crucial. Their behavior was never a verdict on your worth or your desirability or your capacity to be loved. It was always evidence of their wounds and their fears and their complete inability to tolerate the very thing they actually need, but are too defended to accept. Why physical intimacy? Without emotional connection, feels safe to the avoidant, while real intimacy with you felt dangerous. The avoidant person's ability to engage in casual physical encounters while being unable to sustain emotional intimacy with you isn't contradiction. It's the logical outcome of how their defensive system operates and what it's designed to protect them from. Understanding why one type of intimacy feels safe while the other feels terrifying reveals the mechanism driving their behavior. Physical intimacy with strangers or casual partners feels safe to the avoidant because it's time-bounded and consequence-free, with built-in emotional distance that prevents genuine vulnerability. When the avoidant engages in casual physical encounter, there's implicit understanding that this is temporary, that it will end, that no ongoing relationship is expected or desired, that both people can walk away afterward without obligation or continued connection. This time-bounded nature eliminates the terror of being trapped that characterizes the avoidance response to actual relationship. They know the encounter has natural endpoint. They know they can leave. They know no one will expect them to show up tomorrow or next week or to integrate this person into their actual life. The consequence-free nature, no expectations, no emotional demands, no requirement to be available beyond this singular encounter, creates safety through limitation. Nothing about the interaction threatens their independence or their defended sense of self, because nothing about it requires them to actually let the other person in to any part of their emotional landscape. Physical intimacy is happening, but emotional intimacy is completely absent, and it's the emotional intimacy they're actually terrified of, not the physical act itself. The emotional distance maintained during casual encounters protects the avoidant from the vulnerability they fear, while still allowing them to meet physical needs and feel desired. During casual encounter, the avoidant doesn't have to reveal anything real about themselves, doesn't have to share their fears, or their wounds, or their actual thoughts, or their genuine feelings. They can perform a version of themselves, can maintain the facade, can keep every defended part of them completely protected behind walls that casual partner has neither access to nor any expectation of accessing. The other person doesn't know them well enough to see through their defenses, doesn't care enough to push for emotional depth, isn't invested enough to notice when they're being emotionally absent. This allows the avoidant to experience being desired, which their wounds desperately need, without the vulnerability of being genuinely known, which their wounds desperately fear. They can feel wanted without feeling exposed. They can experience physical closeness without emotional proximity. They can meet need for human contact without risking the emotional connection that actual relationship would require. The separation of physical and emotional intimacy isn't accidental. It's precisely engineered defense that allows them to get something they want while protecting against everything they fear. Real intimacy with you felt dangerous because it demanded their actual presence, not just their physical body, but their emotional availability, their honest communication, their sustained attention, their genuine vulnerability. You weren't satisfied with surface-level connection. You wanted to actually know them. You asked questions that required honest answers. You noticed when they were emotionally absent. You called attention to their patterns. You expected consistency in communication and the kind of emotional availability that healthy relationship requires. All of this created threat that casual encounters never create, because casual partners don't expect any of it, don't expect to actually know the avoidant, don't expect emotional availability, don't expect sustained presence or honest communication. With you, the avoidant couldn't hide behind performance because you saw through it. They couldn't maintain emotional distance because you were genuinely trying to create emotional closeness. They couldn't keep you at arm's length because you were offering genuine intimacy that required them to either reciprocate or explicitly reject. And both options felt terrifying. Reciprocating meant vulnerability they couldn't tolerate. Rejecting meant losing someone who actually mattered. Casual encounters also feel safe because they don't activate the avoidance abandonment wounds the way actual relationship does. There's no one to lose because no genuine connection exists. The avoidance core wounds involve fear of abandonment, fear of being left, fear of caring about someone who will eventually hurt them through leaving or through being emotionally unavailable. Casual physical encounters don't activate these wounds because there's no actual attachment forming, no genuine care developing, no real relationship that could be lost. The person is already effectively gone before the avoidant could develop enough attachment to make their leaving painful. This preemptive emotional disconnection protects the avoidant from their abandonment wounds while still allowing physical intimacy. They cannot be abandoned by someone they never allowed themselves to care about, cannot be hurt by the loss of someone who was never integrated into their emotional life. But you activated all their abandonment wounds precisely because you mattered, because genuine connection was forming, because losing you would actually hurt. This activation of their deepest wounds made intimacy with you feel dangerous in ways casual encounters never feel dangerous. The performative nature of casual encounters also allows avoidance to feel powerful and in control in ways that genuine intimacy doesn't allow. They're the one choosing, the one walking away, the one maintaining all the power in the dynamic. In casual encounter, the avoidant typically maintains control. They decide if it happens, they decide when it ends, they decide the level of engagement, they hold all the cards because their emotional investment is zero while the other person may be hoping for more. This power dynamic feels safe because control equals safety in the avoidance system. But in actual relationship with you, the power was more balanced. You had expectations, you had needs, you had your own agency and your own ability to leave if your needs weren't met. This balanced power dynamic felt threatening because it meant they weren't in complete control, meant they had to actually consider your needs alongside their own, meant they had to negotiate and compromise and meet you halfway rather than simply calling all the shots. The loss of complete control felt like loss of safety, triggering defensive withdrawal that casual encounters never trigger because casual encounters allow them to maintain complete control throughout. Physical intimacy without emotional connection also serves as defense against their actual need for intimacy. It gives them just enough to quiet the need temporarily while preventing them from having to address it genuinely. All humans need intimacy. The avoidant is no exception. But their wounds make genuine intimacy terrifying, creating impossible situation where they need what they fear. Casual, physical encounters become compromise solution. They provide just enough sense of connection, just enough physical closeness, just enough feeling of being desired to temporarily satisfy the human need for intimacy while preventing them from having to engage with the genuine intimacy that would actually meet the need at deeper level. It's like eating junk food when you're hungry. It fills your stomach temporarily, but doesn't actually nourish you, and soon you're hungry again, reaching for more junk food, rather than addressing your actual nutritional needs. The avoidant uses casual encounters the same way, filling the immediate sense of lack without addressing the actual wound that genuine intimacy would require confronting. This keeps them in cycle, where they can tell themselves they're meeting their intimacy needs. I'm not alone. I have physical connection. I'm desired, while never actually having to face the vulnerability genuine intimacy demands. How their pattern of casual physical intimacy is actually defense against the real intimacy you offered. The avoidance engagement in casual physical encounters isn't separate from their inability to sustain emotional intimacy with you. It's part of the same defensive system, serving the same protective function through different mechanism. Understanding how casual intimacy functions as defense reveals why they can engage in one while fleeing from the other. Casual encounters allow the avoidant to prove to themselves that they don't need emotional connection to feel desired, reinforcing the defensive belief that emotional intimacy is unnecessary complication rather than fundamental human need. Each casual encounter becomes evidence supporting their defended worldview. See, I can be intimate without all the emotional complexity. I can be desired without having to share my feelings. I can meet my needs without vulnerability. Emotional intimacy isn't necessary. It's just complication that people like her add because they're needy. This self-reinforcing cycle makes it increasingly difficult for them to recognize that what they're doing isn't actually meeting their needs, but is instead protecting them from acknowledging their needs. The ease of casual encounters becomes justification for avoiding the difficulty of genuine intimacy. Why would I work through the discomfort of emotional vulnerability when I can get intimacy without it? The question is based on false premise that what they're getting is actually intimacy. But the avoidant doesn't recognize this, because recognizing it would require admitting that their defensive strategy isn't working, that they're not actually okay, that the thing they're running from is the thing they actually need. The pattern serves as deactivation strategy. When emotional closeness with you started triggering their attachment system, they could distance themselves emotionally while still meeting physical needs elsewhere, giving them release valve that made withdrawal from you more sustainable. When you were trying to create emotional closeness, when you were pushing for more vulnerability, or more consistency, or more genuine connection, their system was screaming danger signals and creating pressure to withdraw. But completely withdrawing would mean no physical intimacy at all, and the avoidant still has physical needs, even while their emotional needs terrify them. Casual encounters with others provided perfect solution. They could withdraw from you emotionally, creating the distance their fear demanded, while still meeting physical needs with people who required nothing from them emotionally. This made their withdrawal from you sustainable, because it wasn't actually withdrawal from all intimacy, just from the specific kind of intimacy that triggered their wounds. The pattern allowed them to deactivate from genuine intimacy while maintaining some form of physical connection, creating impression to themselves that they were fine, that they didn't need you, that they were managing perfectly well without the emotional connection you were offering. Their willingness to engage physically with casual partners while withdrawing from you also functioned as triangulation strategy, consciously or unconsciously, creating situation where you weren't the only option, where they had proof they could get physical intimacy elsewhere, maintaining sense of escape routes that made being with you feel less like trap. Even if they never explicitly told you about casual encounters or never actually acted on them while you were together, the fact that they knew they could engage in casual intimacy elsewhere created psychological escape route that made commitment to you feel less terrifying. I could leave. I could find someone else. I'm not trapped here. This knowledge, even if only theoretical, functioned as pressure release valve that made the intimacy with you slightly more tolerable by assuring them they weren't truly stuck. If they did engage in casual encounters while being involved with you, either before full commitment or during periods of separation or through actual infidelity, the triangulation served even more direct function. It reminded them, and possibly reminded you, that they had options, that you weren't the only person who desired them, that their worth wasn't dependent on your specific validation. This maintains power dynamic, where they're the valuable commodity being chosen, rather than the person desperately trying to hold on to connection, protecting their ego, while making genuine intimacy with you even more difficult. The pattern also protects them from grief about the genuine intimacy they're incapable of sustaining. As long as they're physically intimate with others, they can avoid feeling the emptiness that acknowledging their emotional isolation would create. If the avoidant stopped all intimate encounters and sat alone with themselves, they would be forced to confront how lonely they actually are how empty their defended life actually feels, how much they're missing by keeping everyone at emotional distance. This confrontation would be painful and would create pressure to address their wounds and change their patterns. Casual physical encounters prevent this confrontation by creating just enough sense of connection to avoid the stark reality of their isolation. They're not alone. They're physically intimate with people regularly. They're not isolated. They're desired and pursued. They're not missing anything. They're getting intimacy without all the painful vulnerability. These stories protect them from grieving the genuine connection they're incapable of sustaining, allowing them to continue their patterns without having to face what those patterns are costing them. The grief would be productive. It would motivate change. But change requires confronting wounds they've spent decades avoiding. Casual encounters allow them to continue avoiding indefinitely. Their ability to engage casually also serves as evidence they present to themselves about why emotional intimacy isn't worth pursuing. See, I got what I needed without all that emotional complexity she was demanding. After casual encounter, the avoidant can tell themselves they feel satisfied. They got what they wanted. They proved they don't need emotional intimacy to feel fulfilled. This narrative justifies their withdrawal from you and from genuine intimacy. You were demanding unnecessary complication, asking for vulnerability that isn't actually required for intimacy, expecting emotional availability that serves your needs but isn't actually necessary for healthy sexual connection. This framing allows them to position you as the problem. You are too needy, too demanding, too focused on emotional connection that isn't actually prerequisite for intimacy, while positioning themselves as rational actor who figured out how to meet their needs efficiently without unnecessary emotional entanglement. The narrative is completely false. Casual encounters don't actually provide genuine intimacy or meet deeper needs for connection, but maintaining the narrative protects them from having to acknowledge this truth. The pattern reveals how completely they've compartmentalized physical and emotional intimacy as unrelated experiences. One is manageable and safe, the other is dangerous and to be avoided, and never do they recognize these should be integrated rather than separated. Most people operating from secure attachment understand physical and emotional intimacy as interconnected experiences. Physical intimacy is enhanced by emotional connection. Emotional intimacy often leads to desire for physical intimacy. The two feed each other in ways that create deeper overall intimacy and more meaningful connection. But the avoidant has completely severed this connection, treating physical intimacy as purely mechanical act, unrelated to emotional state or emotional connection with partner. This compartmentalization is defense mechanism. It allows them to engage in one without triggering the fears associated with the other. But it also reveals the depth of their wounds, because separating physical and emotional intimacy, this completely isn't natural or healthy. It's trauma response, evidence of wounds so deep that they've had to split intimacy into separate components just to engage with any form of it at all. The fact that they can engage in casual physical intimacy while being terrified of emotional intimacy isn't evidence they're comfortable with intimacy. It's evidence of how damaged their relationship to intimacy actually is. What the ease of their casual encounters reveals about the depth of their fear of real connection. The contradiction between how easily the avoidant engages in casual physical intimacy and how terrified they are of emotional intimacy with you isn't actually contradiction at all. It's the most revealing evidence of how profound their fear of genuine connection actually is. Understanding what their pattern reveals helps you see their behavior as information about their wounds rather than as verdict on your worth. The ease with which they can be physical with strangers while struggling to maintain emotional presence with you reveals that their issue isn't with intimacy itself, but specifically with intimacy that matters, with intimacy that creates genuine vulnerability, with intimacy that poses real threat to their defended sense of self. If their struggle were simply about intimacy in general, if they were uncomfortable with closeness in any form, they wouldn't be able to engage in physical intimacy with anyone. But they can, easily. As long as that intimacy is compartmentalized, time-bounded, emotionally disconnected, and consequence-free. This reveals that what they're actually afraid of isn't physical closeness, but emotional exposure, isn't being desired, but being genuinely known, isn't connection itself, but connection that actually matters enough to hurt them if it ends, or if the other person rejects who they actually are beneath their defenses. You offered intimacy that mattered. You wanted to actually know them. You weren't satisfied with surface-level performance. And this, intimacy that required their genuine self rather than their performed self, triggered every wound and every defense they've developed, precisely because it was real in ways casual encounters never are. Their pattern also reveals that they've learned to use physical intimacy as substitute for emotional connection, rather than as expression of it, treating sex as purely physical release, rather than as form of emotional communication or bonding. For most people, physical intimacy deepens emotional connection, and emotional connection enhances physical intimacy. The two exist in mutually reinforcing relationship. But for the avoidant, physical intimacy has been completely divorced from emotional connection, transformed into purely mechanical act that serves physical needs while protecting from emotional vulnerability. This transformation didn't happen naturally. It developed as defense mechanism, as way to meet certain needs while protecting from the vulnerability genuine intimacy would require. The fact that they've learned to use physical intimacy this way, that they can engage in it while maintaining complete emotional distance, that they can walk away from it without any sense of connection or bonding. This reveals profound disconnection from their own emotional life and from normal human patterns of bonding and attachment. It's not strength. It's not evidence they're unbothered or independent or emotionally healthy. It's evidence of deep wounds that have forced them to separate parts of human experience that are meant to be integrated. The discrepancy between their availability for casual encounters and their unavailability for genuine relationship reveals their terror is specifically about being trapped, about loss of freedom, about commitment that would require sustained presence rather than about intimacy itself. They can engage in casual intimacy precisely because it doesn't trap them. It's one night, one encounter, one interaction they can walk away from without consequence. But genuine relationship with you required sustained presence, consistent showing up, integration of their life with yours in ways that felt like loss of freedom and independence. They're terrified of losing. The ease of casual encounters combined with the terror of sustained relationship reveals that what they're actually afraid of is permanence, is ongoing obligation, is being needed in ways that would limit their freedom to withdraw whenever they want. This isn't about you being demanding or too much. It's about their profound discomfort with any situation where they're expected to be consistently available, consistently present, consistently meeting someone else's needs alongside their own. Casual encounters require none of this. You required all of it. And their terror of being trapped, of being obligated, of being needed, made the genuine intimacy you offered feel suffocating, while casual intimacy felt liberating. Their comfort with casual physical encounters also demonstrates how desperate they are to prove to themselves and others that they're desired and sexually competent, while avoiding the vulnerability of being emotionally desired or emotionally competent. Being physically desired is safe. It's about their body, their physical attractiveness, their sexual performance, none of which require emotional vulnerability or genuine self-revelation. But being emotionally desired the way you desired them, being wanted for who they actually are, being loved for their personality and their character and their actual self, rather than for their physical attributes or sexual skill. This creates vulnerability they cannot tolerate, because it means someone wants access to the defended parts of them they've spent their entire life protecting. They can't handle being sexually desired, because that desire doesn't require them to reveal anything real. They cannot handle being emotionally desired, because that desire demands they show up as their actual self, rather than as performed version. The ease with which they pursue physical validation, combined with their flight from emotional validation, reveals that their desperate need for external validation is paired with complete inability to receive the kind of validation that would actually heal their wounds. The pattern reveals they're more afraid of being genuinely loved than they are of being alone. Casual encounters maintain their isolation while creating illusion of connection, protecting them from having to face their actual fear. If the avoidant were most afraid of being alone, they would pursue genuine connection, would work to sustain relationship with you, would address their patterns in order to maintain access to the genuine intimacy you offered. But they're not most afraid of being alone. They're most afraid of being genuinely loved, because being genuinely loved requires being genuinely vulnerable, requires being seen, requires risking the pain they believe inevitably follows from allowing someone to matter. Casual encounters are a perfect solution to this fear structure. They create enough sense of connection to avoid feeling completely isolated, while maintaining enough emotional distance to prevent anyone from actually loving them, actually knowing them, actually mattering enough to hurt them if they leave. The comfort they find in this pattern reveals that their defended isolation feels safer to them than genuine love ever could, that they would rather have surface-level connections with many people than deep connection with one person, that they've organized their entire intimate life around avoiding exactly what you were offering. This isn't about you being insufficient. This is about them being so terrified of genuine love that they've structured their entire approach to intimacy around preventing it from developing while maintaining enough physical connection to tell themselves they're not alone. Why? Understanding their pattern helps you release the belief that you are the problem. The avoidant's ability to engage in casual physical intimacy while being unable to sustain emotional intimacy with you created specific wound in you. The belief that if they can be intimate with others, but not with you, the problem must be you. Understanding the actual psychology behind their pattern is crucial for healing this wound and recognizing the truth. Their behavior was never verdict on your worth, but was always evidence of their wounds. Recognizing that their ease with casual encounters is actually evidence of their fear rather than evidence of their comfort with intimacy reframes everything. They're not more comfortable with others, they're more defended, and defense feels safer to them than genuine connection ever could. The interpretation you've been carrying, they can be intimate with others, but not with me, so I must be too intense / too much / too demanding, is based on false premise that their casual encounters represent genuine intimacy or genuine comfort. They don't. Casual encounters represent their defense mechanism functioning exactly as designed, allowing just enough physical connection to meet immediate needs while preventing genuine intimacy from developing. The person they're being with casually isn't getting more of them or better version of them than you got. They're getting defended version, performed version, emotionally disconnected version that requires nothing real from the avoidant. You were getting, or trying to get, the actual person beneath the defenses. The fact that they can maintain defenses with casual partners while struggling to maintain them with you isn't evidence you're the problem. It's evidence that genuine connection threatened their defenses in ways casual encounters never threaten them, which means the connection with you was real in ways casual encounters never are. You weren't too much. You were simply offering something real, and real is terrifying to them in ways casual never is, ever. Understanding that what you were asking for, emotional availability, consistency, genuine vulnerability, are normal, healthy relationship requirements, helps you release the belief that your needs were excessive. The avoidance response to your needs created specific wound where you internalized the message that asking for emotional availability was demanding too much, that expecting consistency was being needy, that wanting genuine vulnerability was being intense. But your needs weren't excessive. They were baseline requirements for functional relationship that any secure person would recognize as completely normal and appropriate. The fact that the avoidant couldn't meet these needs isn't evidence the needs were wrong. It's evidence the avoidant lacks capacity for healthy relationship. They can engage in casual physical intimacy precisely because casual physical intimacy doesn't require any of the things healthy relationship requires. It doesn't require emotional availability. It doesn't require consistency. It doesn't require vulnerability. The ease with which they can engage in something that requires nothing should not make you question whether you are asking for too much by requiring something. You are asking for the minimum necessary for healthy partnership. Their inability to provide it is their limitation, not your excess. Recognizing that their pattern reveals profound disconnection from healthy intimacy rather than evidence of healthy sexuality helps you stop comparing yourself to the people they engage with casually. When you see or hear about them being physical with others while they couldn't sustain intimacy with you, the immediate thought is comparison. What do they have that I don't? What did they do right that I did wrong? Why them and not me? But this comparison is based on false assumption that what's happening between them and casual partners is better or healthier or more genuine than what existed between them and you. It's not. It's profoundly disconnected, emotionally empty interaction that serves defensive purpose while preventing genuine intimacy. The people they're engaging with casually aren't getting something better than what you got. They're getting something fundamentally broken, fundamentally defended, fundamentally incapable of actual intimacy. You were trying to create something real. They defended against it. That's the only story here. Not that you were insufficient. Not that others have something you lack. Not that you did anything wrong. Simply that they're so defended against genuine intimacy that they can only engage in the compartmentalized, emotionally disconnected version that casual encounters provide. Understanding their pattern helps you recognize that walking away from someone incapable of genuine intimacy was a healthy choice even though it hurt, even though they can physically engage with others afterward. The wound they created includes doubt about whether leaving was the right choice. If they can be intimate with others after me, maybe the problem was me, and I gave up too soon. Maybe I should have tried harder, or been less demanding. But their ability to engage casually after you left doesn't mean leaving was wrong choice. It confirms it was right choice. They didn't suddenly become capable of genuine intimacy after you left. They retreated into defense mechanism, casual physical encounters that protects them from having to confront the loss or the wounds or their own incapacity for the kind of intimacy you were offering. Your leaving forced them to face their fear. Their response was to engage in exactly the kind of defended intimacy that allows them to avoid facing anything real. This confirms that they lack capacity for what you need, and that you were right to leave, rather than continuing to accept insufficient intimacy while hoping they would develop capacity. They show no sign of developing. Recognizing that genuine intimacy requires integrated physical and emotional connection, which they're incapable of, helps you see that you weren't asking for anything unusual, but were asking for what healthy intimacy actually looks like. You wanted physical and emotional intimacy to exist together, to enhance each other, to be part of integrated experience of connection with another person. This isn't excessive expectation. This is what healthy intimacy is. The avoidance complete separation of physical and emotional intimacy, their ability to engage in one while being terrified of the other, isn't evidence you were asking for too much by wanting them integrated. It's evidence of their profound dysfunction, their deep wounds, their inability to engage in the kind of intimacy that healthy relationships require. You were asking for health. They're incapable of health. The gap between what you were asking for and what they could provide isn't evidence your expectations were unreasonable. It's evidence of how profoundly damaged their relationship to intimacy actually is, and why relationship with them was never going to meet your needs no matter how much you accommodated or how patient you were. What you deserve and why, their pattern of casual intimacy confirms you made right choice in leaving. The avoidance continued engagement in casual physical intimacy after you left might create doubt about whether you made right choice, might make you question whether you gave up too soon, might make you wonder if the problem really was you. Understanding what you actually deserve and why their pattern confirms rather than contradicts the rightness of your choice helps you move forward with certainty. You deserve someone who doesn't separate physical and emotional intimacy, but understands they're interconnected parts of genuine connection that enhance each other. You deserve someone who wants to know you, actually know you, your thoughts and your fears and your dreams and your wounds. Not just someone who wants access to your body while maintaining complete emotional distance. You deserve someone whose physical intimacy with you is expression of emotional connection rather than compartmentalized act that exists separately from any genuine feeling. You deserve someone who recognizes that the best physical intimacy happens in context of genuine emotional safety and vulnerability, who wants to create that safety with you, who understands that sex without emotional connection might meet immediate physical needs, but doesn't create the kind of fulfilling intimacy that sustainable relationship requires. The avoidant who could engage physically with anyone, but couldn't sustain emotional intimacy with you, was never going to provide this. Their pattern confirms they lack capacity for integrated intimacy you deserve. Leaving wasn't giving up. It was recognizing they couldn't provide what healthy relationship requires and choosing to make yourself available for someone who can. You deserve someone whose intimacy with you makes you feel genuinely chosen and valued, rather than making you feel like anyone would do, like you're interchangeable with whoever happens to be available. When the avoidant can engage intimately with essentially anyone, when the person matters less than the act, when genuine connection with a specific person isn't what they're seeking, but rather physical release that any willing partner could provide, being with them creates a specific wound where you feel unchosen, unspecial, like you could be replaced by anyone at any moment. You deserve to feel chosen, specifically chosen. Chosen because of who you are, not just because you're available. Chosen in ways that make you feel like the person you're with genuinely values you specifically and wouldn't be equally satisfied with anyone else. The avoidance pattern reveals they're not choosing anyone specifically. They're simply engaging with whoever is available and willing, treating intimacy as interchangeable commodity rather than as specific connection with specific person. You deserve better. You deserve someone who chooses you and continues choosing you and makes you feel chosen every day. Not someone who treats intimate partners as interchangeable providers of physical release. You deserve someone who does the work to address their wounds and develop capacity for healthy intimacy, rather than someone who uses casual encounters as defense against having to face their incapacity. The avoidance pattern after you left reveals whether they used the loss as catalyst for growth or whether they retreated into defense mechanisms. if they immediately or quickly engaged in casual physical encounters after you left, they're using those encounters to avoid feeling the loss, to avoid confronting their wounds, to avoid facing what their patterns cost them. They're protecting themselves from grief that would be productive, grief that would motivate them to seek therapy, to address their attachment wounds, to develop capacity they currently lack. Instead, they're numbing themselves with physical encounters that create just enough sense of connection to avoid facing their isolation and their incapacity. You deserve someone who does the work, someone who recognizes their patterns a problem, someone who seeks help to address their wounds, someone who develops capacity for healthy intimacy, rather than continuing to engage in defended version of intimacy that prevents them from ever having to grow. You deserve to be with someone whose past intimate encounters were meaningful connections rather than defensive maneuvers, someone who understands intimacy as sacred rather than casual. The avoidance ability to engage casually with many people reveals how they view intimacy, as physical act rather than as meaningful connection, as commodity rather than as sacred exchange, as something that can happen with anyone, rather than as something special that happens between people who genuinely matter to each other. You deserve to be with someone whose view of intimacy aligns with yours, someone who treats it with the reverence and the selectivity and the emotional weight it deserves, someone who has history of meaningful, intimate connections with people who actually mattered to them, who can look back on past intimate relationships and identify what they learned and how they grew, rather than looking back on string of casual encounters that meant nothing and taught them nothing. The avoidance pattern reveals they're not capable of this kind of meaningful, intimate history. You deserve someone who is. You deserve someone who can sustain what you offer, rather than someone who runs from genuine connection into arms of people who demand nothing real from them. The pattern the avoidant revealed, being unable to sustain intimacy with you, but able to engage casually with others, confirms they lack capacity to sustain genuine intimacy, and confirms that nothing you could have done differently would have changed this. Their incapacity isn't about you being too much, or too demanding, or too intense. It's about them being too defended, too wounded, too incapable of the vulnerability genuine intimacy requires. You could have been more patient, and it wouldn't have mattered. You could have demanded less, and they still would have run. You could have been perfect in every way, and they still would have been incapable of sustaining what you offered, because their incapacity isn't about your behavior. It's about their wounds. You deserve someone who can sustain what you offer, someone who doesn't run from genuine connection, someone who recognizes the extraordinariness of what you bring and has the capacity to honor it through sustained presence rather than through flight into defended casual encounters that protect them from having to be real with anyone. The avoidant will sleep with anybody because anybody doesn't threaten their defenses, doesn't require their vulnerability, doesn't demand they show up as their actual self, rather than as performed version they can walk away from without consequence. You threatened all of this, not because you did anything wrong, but because you offered something real, something that required their genuine presence, something that would have demanded they address their wounds and develop capacity they currently lack. Their pattern of casual intimacy isn't evidence you were insufficient. It's evidence that they're so defended against genuine intimacy that they can only engage in the compartmentalized version that prevents them from ever having to be truly vulnerable with another person. You were never the problem. You were simply offering something their wounds prevent them from accepting, and recognizing this, truly, deeply recognizing that their behavior was always about their incapacity and never about your insufficiency, is what allows you to move forward, knowing with absolute certainty that you deserve and will find someone whose capacity matches the extraordinariness of what you offer. Someone who doesn't need to separate physical and emotional intimacy because they understand they belong together. Someone who doesn't run from genuine connection into defensive, casual encounters. Someone who recognizes intimacy as sacred and who treats it accordingly. Someone who chooses you specifically and continues choosing you and never makes you feel like anyone else would do. That person exists. That person has the capacity the avoidant lacks. And you, the person who was never too much, who simply offered something real to someone incapable of receiving it, you are going to find them, or they are going to find you. Either way, what the avoidant couldn't sustain will become the foundation of something extraordinary, with someone who actually has the capacity to build on it. The avoidant will continue sleeping with anybody, because anybody requires nothing real, and you will continue being someone who deserves and demands and will ultimately receive everything real. That's not failure. That's the most complete success possible. You recognized incapacity. You left to protect yourself, and you freed yourself to find the person who possesses what the avoidant never will, the capacity to hold what you offer without running from it into the arms of people who demand nothing at all.